Let's reconvene the meeting.
Yes.
At this point in time, everybody can be in the room because there's not really going to be discussion. It's just going to be us tallying our ballots, and then they will be passed on to the city clerk. The city clerk will then tally the votes and will announce the results, at which point in time we don't have 5 individuals that have been selected by the body who will repeat the process again. Does everybody understand? Everybody's already voting and folding their paper, so we will proceed with the voting. Should we do it after? If you would like to, I'm more than happy to. If anybody would like to make any remarks before we proceed and read the votes while the votes are being passed, Councilwoman Ortiz was the first one to propose that, but it is open to anybody that would like to make remarks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to thank all of the candidates for coming forward. We've had some good applications. I've been through this process a couple of times, so again, I want to thank you, and hopefully, if you don't get in, that you will contact one of us to get on a board, to get involved, because I think that you guys all have some good qualities. Thank you, Mayor.
Anybody else would like to make any remarks? Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just, I thought a fantastic group of candidates, and not an easy decision. Everybody had 1 or 2 things that I'm like, man, that's perfect. So, great group of candidates, and I've been on the other side of this. It's a lot better to be on this side than that side. So, thanks everyone.
Councilman Padilla.
Thank you, Mayor. I just echo their comments that I was pleased to see the number and quality of people. I know that the comment was made that maybe more could have, but I'm just pleased that people have taken this opportunity to step forward. It's easy to sit back and make suggestions, but not stick your hand in the mud. But this is really important, and I think whoever gets selected will have a big job ahead of them. And those who don't get selected, honestly, stay involved as much as you can. Get connected with a lot of the activities, Momentum 2022, and other things that are available, so that helps you continue your work for the city. So thank you very much.
Councilwoman Heller.
I would echo what my colleague said, and it's always amazing. It's a lesson. It's a testament to what most of you said, which is when you listen, give people a chance, you learn amazing things about their backgrounds and about their points of view, and that really, for me, are renewing in terms of the service that we have. I also, in case you didn't know it, when we do the questions, the council submits them blind. And so I'm always amazed at what a good process it turns out to be, and what a good variety of questions for these kinds of experiences as well. Again, so thank you all, council as well as all of you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. For Council District Number 7, Mr. Neil Dobler received 7 votes, so he will serve as the representative.
Okay. Thank you all who applied. I, again, encourage everybody to continue to be engaged. I look forward to seeing you all. Marge continuing in the meetings, and then all Mr. Book and Ms. Garcia to be very engaged in the community, because we welcome the energy that each of you brought to the process. So the judge took advantage of the 5-minute break to change into her robe. That being said, if she could please step forward to do the swearing in.
Just need Mr. Dobler.
Mr. Dobler, yes.
Stand up now.
Here it is.
say you, you're gonna say I. All right, so I'll say you do solemnly swear, you're gonna say I do solemnly swear. Got it? All right. Welcome this to you, left hand on the Bible, and right hand raised. You do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that you will support the Constitution of the United States of America
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of City Council Member for District Number 7 of the City of Topeka, so help me God.
of District Council Member of District 7, City of Topeka, so help me God.
Congratulations.
Forgot my camera, or what did they have? Yeah, go really quick. So at this point, I would like to welcome new Councilman Dobler to the hot seat.
Cold seat.
So welcome to the team, and at this point in time, we will move on to the non-action item, so you get easy tonight.
A is discussion of proposed amendments to the Topeka zoning regulations, Title 18 of the Municipal Code regarding regulation of small cell wireless facilities.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The regulation of small cell wireless facilities is something that our staff has been considering for a period of time. There are unique situations that are coming. Technology's been changing, and this is a new evolution of what our wireless providers are utilizing in order to ensure that we have the service that we seem to be all demanding. So at this time, I'd ask Director Finder to please come forward and provide us some additional information and make ourselves available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening again. Very good introduction on some of what we're here to talk about. Normally, I come to you with a zoning map amendments where we change the color on the map. This is regarding a zoning text amendment where we change the text of the zoning code, specifically, as you heard, to accommodate a new technology, small cell wireless facilities, or SCWFs. These are the kind of the smaller offspring of their parents, which are the macro cell towers. The large towers at 100, 150 foot tall that would come before you for conditional use permits, and they're on private property, and you heard of several of those, I think, earlier this year. These are, again, they're smaller child. These are 50 foot tall at maximum, typically in the right-of-way of the city. And they don't have as much coverage. They have several hundred feet of coverage. And so they're really meant to accommodate that new 5G technology and relay data from much more different types of assets that are near the public right-of-way. They're best in dense areas, and because of their limited coverage. However, so none have really been put into place yet in Topeka. So we are anticipating a wave of these forthcoming. We've already talked to applicants up to upwards of 30 of these from 2 different applications. Based on the ratio we've been told, which could be up to 1 for every, it's probably 60 per square mile. 60 per square mile. I mean, we're talking up to a couple thousand in the city. Not now, not next year, but eventually that's where it could be going. I don't think you want to be reviewing 2,000 conditional use permits, just to guess. We don't either. So what we're doing with this amendment is, through the change in the text, we are creating more of an administrative approval process for the small cell facilities. And really it would allow two things. One is, first it would create a definition. We do not have a definition of a small cell facility. If we didn't do this amendment, we would treat them like the larger towers, and they would go through a conditional use permit process for the most part in most zoning districts. But this would create a separate definition, and then allow administratively, provided they do two things. One, if they're in the right-of-way, they would have a license agreement with the city to be in the right-of-way. And number two, to follow some general design and aesthetic standards that have been adopted administratively within our engineering specifications. So that's really what this does. Of the aesthetic and general design standards, those really touch on things such as how many you can have on a block, how far they have to be spaced. We also have some context-sensitive areas that are really our preferences. There's not a lot of mandates in these guidelines. They are preferences. We are things such as in historic districts or downtowns, parks, residential areas. Those are kind of outlined in our guidelines. But as you know, and as you've been advised, because of the FCC order, localities are really mandated to accommodate these types of facilities. And so that's what these guidelines do. They show a preference. They show in what we would like them to see on our streets, but in many respects we're a little bit hamstrung by denying these without reasonableness that we would other similar infrastructure in our right-of-way. So again, the need for the amendment, as I mentioned, again, so we have an administrative approval process, and we also will meet the FCC order for what they call a shot clock. If we did not have that administrative approval process, likelihood was we would not be able to meet that with our conditional use permit and building permit timelines. So that allows that, and also, you know, on the flip side, this really allows the city to move closer to being a smart city and really utilizing this technology for our benefit as well and for our citizens. So that's the trade-off. And at this point, we would come back. This has gone to the Planning Commission, this text amendment. They have recommended approval to you unanimously. So we are, we don't have any of these on our plate right now, but I think we have a lot of people waiting for this to be considered, this amendment, so that they can begin that process. So we would like to come back to you in very short order, as quickly as possible with that action, hopefully next time we meet.
Deputy Mayor?
Is this like with the parents' cells that we're just going through the motion that we really don't have a choice?
Well, I would say, much like you experienced the last time, we have less choice than we would normally on things that happen. But we're also being proactive in putting these guidelines out there. The companies are reviewing these guidelines. We have had some inquiries as to certain wording, certain requirements. Legal department's working through those changes. The changes have been made, and you have those. Those are in your packet. There's no new changes, but they are, they're keeping an eye on.
So they're
exactly.
kind of dictating to us what they're going to do, and here we hope you pass this.
I look at it, when I see these questions, is that they are making sure that our regulations or our standards are following that FCC order, and making sure that we're not going beyond our scope that's been
So that's a yes.
mandated by FCC.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Councilwoman Hiller?
Thank you, Mayor. Bill, I'm having trouble just wrapping myself around this. If I can ask you a couple of questions. It seems like, I mean, when we talked about those 3 tall towers recently, we kind of got inside that. And I do think all of us are concerned about living in a city that looks like a wind farm, you know, with all these 150-foot towers, or on a smaller scale, these 50-footers lining everybody's streets. I thought then, backing up from before we had those big towers, that we did do some small cell installations, and what I recall from then was, well, these are small, they look kind of like the boxes that are on the top of utility poles, and anybody that's already got a pole up has to let the utility company add this additional cell box to that existing pole. Oh, it won't, you know, we weren't that crazy about that, as I recall, but at least it didn't require new poles. And they'd be kind of up and down the block on existing poles. So how many, is that still the case? And if so, can we have a priority that they go on an existing pole before a new pole would be installed?
The short answer is yes. That is something we can ask them to do depending on where they're putting it. If they're on a block that has poles, then yes, that's in our guidelines. You know, think of a street light, for instance. You can, there's a type that you can put the antenna on top of the street light. You can also attach to an existing utility pole, telephone pole, power pole, what have you. So that is actually, there's, of the 4 types we have in our standards, there's 3 of them are co-locating types. You can even add the box to a strand between 2 poles. And they can't be any bigger than 6 cubic feet when you do that. So there are some limitations that are baked into not just our guidelines, but state law and FCC guidelines. So we, I don't want everybody to think that it's going to be nothing but poles, because that's kind of the last alternative, although that is something that depends on what block they're on. If there are existing poles, that would be the first preference for them to locate on, and they kind of have to tell us why they can't.
And if they don't, if they can't give a good reason, we can say, no, it has to be on that existing pole?
I think if there's no technical reason, then yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
With that then, I mean, how many poles should we be expecting? If the small cells can be on existing poles, what's it going to look like?
It's a good question. Again, I think in the denser parts of our cities are where you would find them to begin with. We have initial applications, I said, for up to 30, and they're really, interestingly enough, they're kind of spread around, and so they're not concentrated at this point. And again, depending on those blocks, if there are poles, existing poles, it may not be a lot. There's also some other players that are just waiting to see and before they get into the game. So, you know, this wave that we're seeing may not look the same as the next wave that comes along. It's really hard to predict for us what it's going to look like outside of some other larger metro areas that are experiencing that first wave now. They're not everywhere. That's not feasible to be everywhere right now. So they're very selective. And from what I've seen on our maps, they literally are spread out in our geographic areas right now that we've seen.
If I may, are these poles strong enough, like the big tall ones are, to have multiple small cells installed on them?
They'll be strong enough for for the provider, whether or not there's more than one provider, I don't think that's allowed. I think you would either be on another pole on that block or establish a new pole.
But at a certain point, we're going to lose our separation, and we'd have like 100 poles on one block or something.
And we would not have 100 poles on one
Okay.
block. We have very, I can tell you that, because we have a limit as to how many can be on a block, and that's in the guidelines.
Well, that's what I meant, but we have lots of providers, and we've never turned a provider down yet.
There's a limit per provider.
Okay.
There's up to, the most you could have on a 750-plus foot block is 6.
Just checking. One other question, and you know this is coming. I had a constituent who sent me a picture of a new pole that had just gone up at Horn and Willow, and it had little poles sticking out all the way up. It didn't look quite as smooth as the ones that we're talking about. Would that pole have met our design guidelines? It also had quite a bit of structure at the bottom.
Short answer is I don't know. It did not go through review. So I can't give you an answer until we do that.
If I could defer to the city manager, because if we also have our own utilities running around putting up poles, could we expect that to hold ourselves to the same standard, and would those poles be in addition to the small cell poles?
As I mentioned, I sent out an email today late, looking at the fact that this has been brought up. I have asked Bill to look at what we're doing as far as the poles that we're establishing, and whether or not, based on our site locations and things, whether or not what we're utilizing for our standard related to those poles is what we want to have, or if it's something else. And so he'll be evaluating that, providing that information back to me, and I'll get back to you guys.
Thank you. That one in particular, when we had those real tall poles, they all looked real pretty. They were just a monopole with nothing on top, but can they all have, like the small cell ones that we're looking at here, have those little bars all the way up and things like that?
I've never seen one that was like that.
Okay.
And even the equipment on the bottom needs to be concealed and encased. So everything would be, any new pole has to be within metal structures. So we have had some proposals that come forth that were on wooden poles. That wouldn't have met our guidelines as written.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Additional questions for Mr. Fine? Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
We now move on to item B in the consent agenda, if the clerk would read.
B is discussion concerning Appendix C of the International Fire Code, repealing Section 144130 of the Topeka Municipal Code.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, what we're going to talk about is something that was inadvertently deleted back when we approved ordinance. We deleted a Appendix C and replaced it with the Water Department's design criteria. And Fire Marshal Mike Martin is here to talk about why we need to get that added back into our code. Right?
Thank you, Mr. City Manager, governing body. What we're talking about here is when we adopted the 2015 International Fire Code, we both adopted and deleted Appendix C. Appendix C is a one-page document. It's used to be a little more specific on the water needs when we talk about fire flows. If you look at the city's water distribution design criteria, that's kind of a broad-based across the city on where we're going to put hydrants, residential areas, things like that. This deals strictly with commercial structures, and it's not going to, we currently use that as a guideline right now because we thought it was adopted. And it doesn't really make any significant changes. What it does is, in the code, when we get a new commercial structure, if it's a larger one, we will actually figure out, depending on how the building is constructed, what its use is going to be, and what fire protection systems it has. We determine what the actual flow, how much water we need to sustain firefighting operations for an hour or 2 hours if the building was 90% involved. And so what Appendix C does is it takes those numbers and then it addresses how many hydrants will need to be in there. So when we discovered that it had been inadvertently deleted, we went and talked with utilities, talked with Braxton, and we came into an agreement that the Appendix C really is better for us to determine the actual fire flow needs on these larger commercial structures.
Questions for Mr. Martin? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
We now proceed to item C of the non-action items.
C is discussion regarding parking rate recommendations to support the modernization of the downtown parking system.
Public Works Director Peak will go through the parking plan presentation for us tonight. Will provide us a lot of good information regarding what we're considering in a number of different areas related to the funding recommendations and setup with regards to supporting our parking fund going forward with the modifications that we've been discussing related to different changes we want to make both in the parking structures and also in on-street parking. So, Dr. Peak?
Good evening, governing body. Thank you for letting me back clean up tonight on the presentation discussion. We'd had Deputy Director Hannah Yolrig was going to present on this, but we had something come up this afternoon. She couldn't be here, so I'm going to go through it for you. If I miss a beat, we'll definitely make sure we take your question down and get it answered. We came to you a couple weeks ago to talk about parking technology and about the progress we're making on changes to downtown parking. And tonight, we want to talk to you about rate recommendations to support the modernization of our downtown parking system, as well as providing sufficient funds to maintain that infrastructure. Before we get into the rate recommendations, I just want to kind of go through how we've gotten to this discussion, because it's been a while since you all have talked about parking. So we'll do a 101, some background, a review of the financial plan, and then get into the rate changes. Just a reminder, parking is what we call an enterprise fund within city government. So tonight you guys have talked a lot about budgets and saw some revenue projections for our overall budget. Parking is an enterprise fund that's solely supported by the fees it charges and revenues it collects for parking activities. So the general fund does not provide funding from property tax or sales tax into the parking fund. Its revenue for operations is based on what we collect from meters, garages, enforcement, and our monthly permits. The structure of parking basically includes parking manager. Brenda Hayes, our division manager, is here tonight, and her and Hannah have spent a lot of time working on improving our parking operations. And then we're divided kind of into our garage management, maintaining the garages that the city owns, basically our enforcement, which is a large part of the on-street operation, so meters and compliance with the meters that we have out there. And then we have the office administrative staff that help with the permitting and customer service aspect. In 2017, we wrapped up a downtown parking plan that was done by Desmond Associates, a national parking consultant that came in. With that, the council adopted the recommendations from that and authorized us to start implementation. A big piece of that was talking about looking at our 10-year financial forecast within that enterprise fund. And we talked in 2017 about there was a gap basically between the expenses we needed to modernize and maintain the infrastructure versus the revenue that we would need to support that. And then the last piece that talk about background is staff has spent a lot of time since 2017 regularly engaged with the customers of downtown parking as well as some of the key stakeholders. Brenda and Hannah actively participate through GTP and the DTI Committee on Downtown Parking provide regular updates. We've met with the small business group, the NIAs, and regularly been engaged with the stakeholders to talk about what we're doing in parking and where we're going. And to just kind of pause there, part of what we're looking for tonight is to get some feedback from you all on what we're proposing from these recommendations so that we can then take that information back out to these stakeholders, re-engage, present, have those discussions, and then come back to you in December with a recommendation for action. So key parts of the financial piece of what's driving this is, number one, modernization of our parking system. We talked about that at the last meeting where we showed you we're actually doing smart meters. These are meters that are able to accept coins, cards, as well as to be able to pay by an app over a phone. I mean, basically reducing those barriers to pavement. That costs money, and then the upgrade of that infrastructure, having smart meters means they're actively communicating via cellular network. And so there's the ongoing operating expense of that versus today what we have out there are basically mechanical meters. You put money in, it registers at that meter. We don't know if that meter's working until we come by and look at it. If we need to change the rates on that meter, we physically have to go in that versus having a computer system. We also are looking at, the other things we've heard through engagement with customers about desires for modernizing parking, improving lighting within the garages, installing cameras and security systems, as well as some of the digital message displays to help let people know where parking is available downtown. And then the other piece of what we need to do in parking, and something that I talk to you regularly about across our infrastructure systems, is have that asset management plan in place for these pieces of infrastructure, our garage, our on-street lots, these meters. They have a life cycle. And at some point, you need to replace these. You have to do different types of maintenance. And so we've estimated that at about $4 million over the next 10 years, or $400,000 a year needs to be set aside. We may have $1 million in expense, but to kind of budget and be able to afford that out of the fund, we believe $400,000 is that level annually we need to be setting aside. And just talk about that asset maintenance and useful life. I think this is a good slide that Hannah put together looking at our useful life of garage. And within the industry, garages have are estimated about a 50-year life. That doesn't mean they fall down after 50 years, but you just expect a 50-year service life before you're getting into some pretty significant repairs. And we talk about preventative maintenance and things like that can extend the life of garages. And what this is showing you is it's basically a chart of when a garage was constructed versus where it is in that 50-year life. And that gray bar running up and down the middle is basically where we are now, right before the verge of going into 2020. And you can see we've got one garage, Coronado, that was built back in the early 60s that it's beyond its useful service life. And so, we're going to be needing to talk about some maintenance activities such as deck sealing and other things within that garage, elevator repair, some of the electrical lighting systems that we need to be thinking about. And then we've got, the newest garage, Crosby, within the system that was built back in late 2008 range, has much of its useful life still left. And just, the overall value of these garages, this is about $67 million of assets based on insurance valuation of the garages. So we're talking about a significant investment that the city made through the parking fund that needs to be maintained. So I'm going to walk through a couple of slides here looking at our financial plan. And the first piece, as I mentioned, we did a 10-year projection. So what this slide is showing you, the orange or the first bar on the bar chart basically reflects anticipated revenue in the year. The blue bars reflect the anticipated expenses. And And then the green line is basically our fund balance. So the parking fund is an enterprise fund. Governing body has set a policy that we have to maintain a portion of our revenues within that enterprise as a fund balance for an operating fund balance. And then the remainder of that is what we use to put in and help us modernize and also maintain the garages. So, parking on a revenue side brings in a little about over $3 million annually. And you can see our expenses over this 10-year period vary from about 3.5 with a high in 2027 going up to a little over 4.5 million. And part of that's the replacement cycle of some of the infrastructure. And so with no changes to the revenue rates that we have today, and assuming that we implement the modernization and the asset pieces, not saying that we spend that money, but if you just looked at that, basically the fund can't support those changes. And so you see that in 2022 is when that fund balance would no longer be able to support the activities. So, I mean, the good news is the decision we're asking is to move forward with some changes and start that in 2020, but it's not, there's time for discussion on this. So talked a little bit about 2022 is kind of that target area where we get into the fund balance. And want to look at, talk a little bit about the revenue recommendations that we have in there. And so within the parking study, it was looked at what if we're assuming that the parking fund has to support itself as an enterprise fund, what are some of the changes we could make to existing rates to support that? And what this chart is showing is adding about, if these changes were implemented, our forecast says it'd add about $640,000 annually to the parking fund. So the first would be increasing the rates that we charge in garage, and I'm going to kind of go into detail of those when we get into recommendations. Payment method impact. So we lose revenue because we only offer on our on-street operation one way to pay. You have to have coins. So we know we have people out there that they take a risk. I'm going to run inside and maybe parking enforcement doesn't come by and catch me. So we lose money by not having multiple ways for people to pay. On the flip side, those people that do break the rules, we do issue fines. And so parking fines is a way, but the fines are fairly low comparatively, so we are recommending basically an increase in the fine rates to support parking. We're also recommending changes to our metered rates, and we're going to talk about demand pricing and those rate changes and why that's important. And that's what gets into the high demand rate change. I mean, the example is if you ever go to the airport, you know that circle parking by the gate is $18 a day. If you want to save money, you park in the economy lot or make a deal with a hotel, and they charge that much. Why? Because that's high demand. People pay for that convenience factor. You go to TPAC next door and you want to see a show. There's tiered pricing there. Why? They charge more for where people want to be location. Parking's no different, right? People can choose different options, and that's what we're talking about with rate change. And then the bigger piece is, currently we do not charge for parking on Kansas Avenue or the side streets. And, there's a lot of people out there that think we should keep it that way, that don't support, I guess, charging for parking. But that's our highest demand area. And, I like to say we can provide free parking, just somebody's got to pay for it. All right? So is that the customer? Is that the city? Is that the businesses? I mean, who pays for that? Because there's a cost to it. And so you see, if we instituted back parking on the avenue and the side streets, that would add about $280,000 annually on our forecast. And so if you made those rate changes, this is the picture. So it's the slide I showed you before with kind of the declining fund balance. So the big impact here is our revenue bumps up with those changes. You see that we maintain a fund balance that is growing over time. It's still, the piece that's not shown in here is we do that fund balance is as we implement, we're setting $400,000 aside for asset maintenance, but we may need to spend $1 million in a year on kind of a garage repair, and that's not what's reflected in this is those planned expenses, but you are accounting for saving those funds for those future expenses. And then the last piece I want to show before I stop and maybe see if there are any clarifying questions is we also wanted to look at, as we look at these rate changes, is there a nexus between the areas that we're proposing rate changes versus our cost of service? And so these two slides, same kind of thing, talks about revenue being basically the orange bar, blue, the lower bar being our expenses. And we've kind of broken it down into surface lots, on-street being our metered and permit parking, and garage. And you can see just looking, let's focus on the middle, the on-street. Currently, we bring in about $600,000 from meter and on-street permit fees, but our expenses are about $1 million on that. So within the fund itself, you kind of have garage and surface lots subsidizing some of that expense. So with the recommended revenue adjustments, what you see that we're doing by recommending these rate changes is we're bringing the revenues more in line with the expense that it would be to operate those different pieces of the parking system. So, a big chunk of that is you're charging for parking on Kansas Avenue and the side streets, as well as you're increasing that payment impact, so that really bumps up that number. The garage rates go up, and so your revenue is a little bit more than your annual expenses, but part of that rationale is we have a deferred maintenance need within those systems that we need to get ahead of before that gap widens. And so with that, I just wanted to stop and see if there are any questions about how we got here, the financial plan, because the next piece I want to go into is the rate recommendation changes.
Councilman Cohen, to be followed by the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Peak, have we ever considered maybe selling underperforming garages, maybe and privatizing them and kind of getting out of that? I remember when we did the parking study, there were some garages that do better than others, and have we considered maybe getting out from under some of those lower performing ones?
So we had analysis done in 2012 looking at potentially selling our garages. And I think the short answer is we've looked at it. The hard answer is it's a system. And so you have some garages that, Crosby and Center City, they have debt associated with them, bonds, so they're not paying for themselves. So our garages that don't have debt and are utilized are helping subsidize those. So it's a hard thing to extract yourself from. But I mean, that's a question that I think is for this body. Is that the city's role to be involved in providing parking downtown? Is it a core service that we do? I mean, it's important to have some control over development. A lot of the communities that we look at parking-wise have some type of subsidy from city government for city garages through the general fund, through a TIF, through other mechanisms. So, can you set a parking rate that's acceptable to the customer that doesn't require a subsidy? And that's, if you can, then probably private business would do it wholesale.
Deputy Mayor.
I get it. I mean, I understand all this, but it kind of goes back to the flag with me. I like those little coins. I mean, I think it gives our,
Some spares.
I think it gives our town a cozy, old-fashioned feel. And I really hate to see those go, but it's like the flag. I'm not going to be the old person that stands in the way of progress, but I get it.
Councilman Emerson?
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Peak, thank you for the report so far. I had a question on this, on the on-street parking. What drives the cost of that? Is it the people to enforce the fines?
Yeah, I
Is that
mean,
it?
basically, you have the personnel cost, so, go back to the total number of employees. You
I
have,
think there's 5 that deal with that.
we
one
have
manager,
4 parking enforcement officers and a supervisor, and we have, basically the vehicles they do, the meter repair, and then, like I said, the part of the costing that's reflected in these revenues is the fact that as you went to the smart meters, you're adding a cell service payment. Basically, each one of these smart meters is a cell phone. So you have a data and connectivity fee with that. So you're adding cost with the smart meters.
Okay. How many meters do we have right now?
We have about 3,000 spaces. I believe about 1,200 are metered. And so part of, what we did is the early phase of implementation was get rid of meters in underutilized locations.
So if my math's right now we're spending about $1,000 per meter. Not quite that, but 900 and some bucks per meter per year.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say, I guess some of that cost, it'd be the same because right now they're also doing enforcement on Kansas Avenue, so they'd still have that same enforcement cost. But, okay, well, let me think on that, but have there been any studies done to kind of quantify the impact of putting meters on Kansas Avenue? As you know, right now people can go out to West Ridge, they can go out to all these places and park for free at restaurants and stuff. And I'm just worried, we just heard Mr. Dobler, I guess, to be Councilmember Dobler earlier this evening, talk about, the downtown, how it's been such a boon now.
Sure.
And are we going to cut off oxygen to the very thing that's?
So, a couple things is we're not proposing any changes to the time. So metered parking would still be in that 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. So you're not paying to come downtown after 5. You're not paying to come downtown on the weekends. Garages are also free at night and weekends. And, that's definitely a concern we've heard from the customers is this is going to take away business. People aren't going to want to come to pay to park. But we have people paying to park at other meters downtown. So, I just would put that out there that we do have other metered spaces that people are paying to park at. And I think the other thing is you want to incentivize turnover with spaces. So there's the complaint about state employees parking in our time zones, and I would never blame you, but I know you've heard that complaint is why I'm making eye contact, is you've heard that as well. And so people that play that game with our parking enforcement officers of trying to beat the parking enforcement. So we have these problems we're trying to solve. I think the other thing that we've got plenty of parking downtown, but everybody wants to park on the avenue. That's where they want to park. People want to park in front of the store they're going to, but you also got to think is if you're increasing turnover, so maybe more of those spaces are available because people are having to pay for their time there. There's more availability of spaces as they turn over. And then there's also the effect that if people are having to pay to park and they're walking, that, impulse buy that occurs. Like if I'm going to Cashmere and I can park right in front, I'm walking in Cashmere. But if I got to park at Julie's, walk up to Cashmere, maybe I go into Julie's, get a cup of coffee. Or maybe I go past another business and I go in there. And that's part of the importance of encouraging walking and some of the turnover in parking. But understand that's a real fear. People are saying if we put metered parking there, that it's going to have an impact. And so we're trying to balance all that out.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz to be followed by Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm glad you kind of explained that, because I know when it was free, I was like, what are we doing? We're spoiling, the people, but we do want them to come downtown. So we really have to watch how we handle that when we go into that. Having said all that, we have a lot of out-of-state attorneys, and let me tell you what they tell me. I just go ahead and park wherever. I don't even plug the meter. You know why? Because anybody that's out of county, we get a warning ticket. Does that still happen?
For the first file, we have it a courtesy that your license plate, you get one warning if
But they're telling me they do it all the time, and I just get that little courtesy warning. I think that needs to be cut out. I'm sorry. I think that needs to be cut out. If we're gonna really look at this and we're gonna get that revenue, and then I have my Shawnee County people say, really? They live in Jefferson County, but they get a courtesy, but I don't get a courtesy, and I live here and I pay taxes? How does that happen? So I would like to see that cut out, period. Either we're gonna do it for all, or we're not gonna do it at all. But you have a lot of attorneys, and he showed me a whole bunch of courtesy copies, and I'm like, wow.
Sure. And what I'd say in the 4 years I've been here and the 2 that Brenda has been in parking, we've corrected a lot of past practices of not being consistent how we enforce the rules.
Right.
And that's caused a lot of strain downtown, to be honest. We've got a lot of pushback of why are you doing this? And we are trying to hold that same standard across the board.
And I understand we're trying to be friendly, but at the same time, when I go to Atlanta, nobody's friendly there with me. I'm sorry, and I got my out-of-state tags. It's 15 minutes, and then it bumps up to $20, 15 minutes is free. I can't go anywhere, any establishment to eat for 15 minutes, and there's no parking down there. So I just think that just needs to be cut out, because they're taking advantage of it. Our Shawnee County people don't like it, where we pay taxes. Parking garages, we've talked about for a long time. I've talked about it for a long time on this corner. They're not money makers. They're not, guys. They're going to take our money. That's what they're going to do. So we have to think of different ways. I still want to know how we are advertising our parking garages. I get people downtown that say, hey, can I rent space in the garage? Because parking it's really, really bad there now that we have some of the establishments open for eating. And then, I'm still struggling with the people that live downtown. I would like to see, we want people to come downtown to live, and they're inconvenienced a lot, by all the free things that we put on downtown. Let's say they have a concert. They set up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They're out there doing sound checks. These are my old people who can't hear at 9th and Kansas Avenue, and this is what they tell me. Man, they're up. And then they don't go home until 11 or 12 o'clock. And then there's nowhere for me to park, Sylvia. Then I have to park they live at Canton Towers. They have to park across the street, and I got to carry my little oxygen tank, or I got to carry my groceries. I would like to see us, if you have if you live downtown, that they are able to park down there free, because they're inconvenienced when we block off the streets, and I think we could do that by having them show their lease of where they live at, and that would be, give them a sticker or something. I talked to Lisa Stubbs, and she says, I have a loft or something downtown. I can't rent it out because of parking and because it's, and now with the pennant, I used to be able to park on 9th Street and walk around the corner. There's nothing down there. There's no parking. I have to walk, well, I need to, but anyway. So those are some of my concerns. I have some more that I want to sit down with Jason. I won't take up a lot of time. It's getting late. But those are just some of the things that I hear. The other one was, you talked about dollars depending, like recommend first violation depending on violation location. Are you saying that we're going to have a higher violation if we park on Kansas Avenue, whether if we park out? Is that what you're trying to say here?
In a way, yes, ma'am, in the sense of whatever, we're talking about demand pricing for on-street rates, and I'll get into that. So if there's a higher on-street rate, the fine for violating that would be 8 times the on-street rate.
No, I see here 10 times the hourly rate.
Yeah,
So my $8 parking ticket can be $80. Wow.
Well, it would be $10.
10 times
At a
the
dollar an
hourly
hour.
rate.
Or 20, $2 an hour.
Right.
It wouldn't be 80.
Well, I'm thinking, well, he's saying 8 times 10, that's 80.
No, the hourly rate.
Hourly
Oh, the
rate.
hourly rate, okay. With successive violations of 15?
Yeah, so I mean, if you have repeat violation, I mean, and we have people.
Oh,
that-
I understand. They park there all day, they don't care, yeah.
And so that's taking away business from other customers. I mean, you know, that's the balance here.
Where's my boot at? I don't see anywhere in here where they boot me. Where are we at when we get the
I'll
boot?
you- I don't have that specific answer.
Do we
but I-
still boot?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
I think Mr. Henderson needs to boot. That's what I think over there, but I have some more. I won't take up much time, but I have about 10 more items I'll go through with you, Jason.
Okay.
But those
I'll
are
set up
a
the
couple of my main concerns. I don't want to see us go up on the rate. I would like to see us take our freebies back, because when we went up to $8, people screamed. And I'd also like to see us, like I said, I think we've done enough courtesy over the years. It's time that they bite the bullet. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilman Jensen, to be followed by Councilman Dobler.
Thank you. So in all of this, I'm not seeing where there was any consideration to not make this an enterprise fund. I agree with Councilwoman Ortiz. This is not a moneymaker. It should not be a moneymaker. We're going to drive downtown out of business trying to make it a moneymaker. This is the result of having a successful downtown. We have to provide parking. So I think it's time to stop talking about how we make this make money and look at how we provide a better service. It's never going to be successful if we go down the approach of trying to make money at all. So while I appreciate all this, I absolutely disagree that this is even close to the right approach. Our first priority should be to provide parking and make it a balanced and easy thing for everyone to use. Yes, charging for parking is the mechanism you use to balance that, generally speaking, but our primary focus in all of this is revenue, and I think that's the wrong focus. So I appreciate your work in here, and I'm happy to sit down and talk with you further about it, but the basis of this plan, in my opinion, is not the right approach.
Okay, and I just want to make sure we're talking the same language. We're not talking about it being a profit center or money maker. We're talking about covering our costs to modernize and operate the system.
So your projections show an increase in revenue starting at 2023. That should not be the case. It should be,
That's
the
for Main
goal should always be zero.
It's basically to have money to we need
maintain.
to replace a garage or repair a garage, that we are accounting for that in our enterprise fund, similar to we do in utilities and other enterprise funds for those.
And while I understand that, we don't do that with anything else we have with infrastructure. Everything is always in the hole and we're digging out of it. So in this approach, this is unique, and I don't disagree with,
Sure. No, I
we
just-
can pay for ourselves out of it, but
I think it's a fair point. I mean, that's why I stressed that assumption at the beginning is we're assuming council wants to keep this an enterprise fund because we know the challenges with the general fund and other demands on the limited resources we have. So if that's the direction the body wants us to go, we didn't go that way because we had not heard that.
well, and I understand that, but again, this is a service, and, maybe it's time to talk about, does the BID provide part of the funding for this? I mean, again, this infrastructure is intended to support the businesses in downtown. Most businesses that own a parking lot have to pay to maintain that. So again, I own a business in downtown, I should be contributing partly to help cover the cost of parking my customers. That's a cost of doing business. I don't see this plan incorporating that. And so that's a conversation I guess I'm disappointed that we didn't have in terms of how do we look at providing service first instead of revenue first. And granted, you're right, it is intended to cover some of the costs of it. This whole presentation is revenue and not about how do we provide better parking. And we've got to be about providing better service to our constituents and customers.
City Manager, you wanted to
Yeah,
reply to that?
Councilman Jensen, we already know how to provide the service related to the parking.
Right.
Those things have been identified. All along, we've been going on the premise that the governing body wants to not contribute general fund money into running our parking system. It has never been discussed that we need to change that. And so if your suggestion has traction with others that we want to supplement, which would mean a mill to 2 mills to make up for revenue that's lost here, then we need to have that discussion because that changes the whole discussion. You know, our purpose was to provide ourselves a methodology that allows us to charge for parking, charge for the use that people have for parking to the appropriate people that are using it, to make the money that's necessary in order to maintain a system that is very expensive to maintain. Garages are very expensive to maintain.
Yes, they are.
And so that's been our position all along. That's what we've been lurking under for the last 2 years. So if your suggestion has others that are interested in looking at that, we really need to know that because this changes our work with regards to establishing appropriate rates, appropriate charges both in garages, on-street, lots, everything. That changes everything. And so if that's the direction, we really need to know some.
If I could respond. So this is the first time that we've been presented this information that I understand. I mean, I know there's been some conversations here and there, but, you know, was there any consideration about leveraging the BID and that mechanism that the business owners in downtown pay into to help take care of downtown? Was that ever even considered?
The BID with its current structure, it would be a lot more expensive in order for them to consider the expenses that are related to this. One of the things that we've looked at in order to mitigate that was that there's a system that allows a particular business, if they have a customer that's utilizing the parking, to pay for the parking so the customer doesn't need to. And for that way, we establish the appropriate rates, and they would then in turn be paying their customers fees, which then allows them to participate in the costs that we have to maintain these assets. So those are a couple of things that we've been looking at. The BID amount it's an amount that's meant for slightly to maintain the appearance of downtown. If we go to it maintaining our parking, that would be a large jump for the downtown businesses on top of what they're paying for property taxes. I'd be very surprised to have much support for that.
If I could respond to that. So then the alternative is, if you double my BID rate, but it still keeps parking affordable for my customers and doesn't require me to train staff on how to run an app to validate parking, then there are considerations on the other side of that. There's a lot of administrative overhead and I love the idea of using technology to be able to validate customer parking. I think that's great. But there's a training overhead and an administrative overhead. It's going to cost a significant amount of money on both the city side with the technology and on the business side to train staff to use that and to get customers trained to ask for that and show proof of purchase. Or I could pay a one-time fee per year that helps support that system. But I'm not saying that that's the right answer. I'm just a little surprised that that wasn't a deeper consideration in this.
And the last comment I'll have regarding that is, I mean, your input is exactly why we have this discussion item on the agenda, because they're already planning to go back and talk with downtown Topeka to the folks that run BID to ask them, they can pose this question to them and we can get feedback from the very folks that are running that program and having to pay those fees and find out if they're interested in something like this, or they can tell us which alternative they would prefer to run. So I'm glad you brought it up, because without that, we would not be asking the right questions to get feedback from those that are going to be most affected by this.
Excellent. And I absolutely believe it should be their option. You know, if as a business owner in downtown, my perspective is let's pay a fee once a year and be done with it, as opposed to having to continue to train staff and do that again and again. But you know, if that's the option they want to, that's fine too. But it's got to be service first for customers, otherwise there won't be anybody in downtown using this to pay for it. Thank you.
Councilman Dobler.
All right, my first question. It's kind of cool. Dr. Peak, I would be interested in the breakdown. I think traditionally Kansas Avenue has been free parking since maybe 1985 or so. You started hooding meters with construction, right?
2013, I believe, is when the side streets basically got.
So out of the 280,000, do you have any idea what the breakdown is
About
between
100
Kansas?
We lost about 180,000 from that metering those side streets, taking those off the system.
So Kansas Avenue would only get us $100,000?
That was the estimate in 2017.
Okay. The other question I have, if I could, so is selling parking garages a consideration still, or is that just part of the mix?
It would, I mean,
You're
all
not,
options
yeah.
are on the table. We're proceeding down a path of, we talked about how to improve parking, so there were a number of strategies we talked about of modernizing, that was going to smart meters, upgrades to the garage, and we were proceeding with how do we change those revenue mechanisms, but if getting rid of a garage was something that, or getting out of the parking business altogether was something this body thought we should be doing, I think we're open to those discussions.
I think it'd be really helpful to have like a pro forma for each of the garages. As I recall, people want to buy the garage that has no debt, but it's also producing the most revenue.
That's correct.
And coupling that with how much is it going to cost to modernize it would be helpful information. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just thought of another question. There's been several parties on the top of these garages. Who gets that money? Where's that money go?
That just goes through the city event permit, so we don't get any additional revenue into the parking fund for use.
How come it's our garage? And they rent it?
Because it falls under the event policy for use of city property as opposed to the garage having.
Oh, so they don't pay for it then?
They pay through the,
$50 application fee.
If they're going to rent the garage.
Well, then we need to start renting the garage, because you know what? There's been some parties up there. They had a class reunion party up there. They've had several. There's a birthday party they had up there. And if they like the view, that would be some revenue.
yes.
City Manager.
Deputy Manager mentioned to me that we've made an offer to a developer. They came to us with the idea that they may be interested in purchasing one of our garages, and so we've had a discussion just recently even with a developer about the possibility of selling one of our garages to them to help them meet their parking needs. And then they would, whatever they did not use, then they would use, they would sell privately. Doug also mentioned that we have an old pro forma on some of our garages, and so we'll find that, and if we can't get it updated, at least be able to show you what's been done in the past.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Doug.
I want to compliment the staff on the work that they've done with the study as well as the visiting that they've done with the downtown folks. If I can spend a little time kind of going back to the beginning and then up to current as well, some of the conversations and that people are needing to wrap their heads around, and the staff has really made a lot of progress with them, is when we first started this process, the discussion was, we have to get over this because the sign of a good, thriving downtown is a parking problem. Because you have more vehicles, if people parked at the door like they did in a small town, you can't do that. And some of the discussions with the merchants has been, if you've got a 25-foot storefront, there's never going to be more than 4 parking spaces out front. How many customers did you want to have? And really the presentation I have heard the staff do is not money-based, but is demand-based, is having a system that will encourage that turnover so that those very small businesses that we wanted to see on Kansas Avenue are able to have their customers come and go. That aside, part of this automated system allows, if you've got a big event or you've got a restaurant, there's no way all your customers are going to park in the front. And so working out systems that are convenient, that allow the merchants to buy spaces for their customers or to frank tickets and go through, they've got that all figured out in the system. One of the phrases that we hear now is, it's not a parking problem, it's a walking problem. When you've got a healthy downtown, it changes, just like you park at the mall and hike in to the outside door and then go from store to store. When we have that kind of volume that we're expecting in downtown, it's the same kind of thing. And we also still, we've made such tremendous progress downtown, but before we get done, we should have at least, and I haven't seen an official number, so Bill Finder probably will have it with the housing study, but at least 3 to 5 times as many people there every day, working or living or visiting those properties. And so before we give up the garages, also the advantage is we can control the rates and we can stage them based on the demand rates that Hannah has put forth. What you may want to ask for some samples of that too, because this ordinance they're asking us to give them a fee range rather than specific fees for specific blocks so that they don't have to come back all the time, but they can give you some examples if you want them. It's a pretty complex system, but we have to remember when you have a thriving downtown like we wanted, which is what we're getting, people can't all park at the door anymore.
I don't mean to cut the conversation short, but we have a projected 24 minutes in public comments. So if we would like to extend the discussion, I am happy to, when we're getting closer to 10 o'clock, after we do announcements, project an extension to allow for the public comment completion.
I'll do it now.
Okay.
I have a motion to extend till the meeting's done.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Additional comments or questions? Seeing none,
Welcome, Neil.
we proceed by voting.
Yeah, hold on a second, yeah, I was just asking her if she needs to get Neil's voting. We didn't think Neil would end up having to have a vote tonight, but by golly, he will. So she's
And it's
better.
everybody's favorite vote.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Our time went on 0 to 60.
It's not coming up yet.
There we
Oh,
go.
there it goes.
Mr. Lester?
He's not here.
Gone.
We'll get later.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the meeting has been extended. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. So what I had hoped to see in this recommendation, and still would like to, is some actual information about what should we expect for turnover rates for on-street parking? What should we expect for turnover rates in a garage? How do we load balance residential with evening business, with daytime business across our parking system? I don't see any of that information in this presentation. It's all about finances. Again, I still think we should have started the other way, and maybe that information's there and it's just not been presented, but how often should we expect to see cars on street turn over? And are we properly setting up that system in order to handle that? Yes, the people that park in the garage during the day are generally not the same people that park in the evening. In theory, we could sell that spot twice unless the person lives downtown. I don't see any of that information here, and I'm not asking for it this evening because I know the meeting's running long, but that's the kind of data I had hoped to see that would then drive the cost conversation, and then what we get for revenue is what we get, and we have to inject some budget to meet that if indeed it doesn't break even.
Yeah, the short answer is we're striving for 85% utilization in those on-street, in the parking industry. 85% is where people perceive that the parking is full. You can still have spaces available, but that's kind of the target of the demand and kind of what I'd like to get into within the recommendations and go through that and get some feedback. So.
I would love to see those numbers when you have some time.
Okay?
So the other part of the presentation was actually talking about staff's recommendations, and so this is coming at, what we were looking at for changes to rates within the ordinances. So I'm going to kind of go one by one through these. As Councilwoman Hiller indicated, the concept we're talking about here is asking for demand pricing, and we'd be asking for council to set a minimum and maximum rate. So basically, you would say the minimum we would charge for hourly parking would be 50 cents. The maximum that we could go up to would be $2 per hour. And of course, we'd look at putting that $2 an hour in place where we're seeing that full utilization of parking. And part of the reason for asking for these rates is, is being able to set these and adapt them to actively manage the parking. The table to the side shows basically what the current rate being charged. We talked about charging for parking on Kansas Avenue as well as the 100 block. So that current hourly rate is 0. We have 10-hour zones. These are people that don't want to park in a garage but basically want to buy an all-day pass to park in permitting, so providing on-street parking. I mean, this is available to employees as well as residents, but these are zones that may not be as close to where that person is working or living. And then we have all other locations have a $1 per hour rate. Our recommendations would be, to be able to go up in that highest demand location of Kansas Avenue up to $2 an hour. The side streets would be $1 an hour, so you're incentivizing people to, if they want to park on the avenue, they're paying a higher rate. And then if they want to pay a lower rate, there are other lower rate options available. You also see with the garages, people that are staying longer, there's a lower hourly rate there within the garages. We're talking about increasing the hood rate. So a lot of times you see the green hoods. These are for contractors or other events and things like that to be 8 times the hourly rate. And forgive me, Councilwoman Ortiz, this is where I misspoke, but that hourly rate would be, it'd be 8 times. If it was $2 an hour, the hood rate would be 8 times that. So basically to hood that. So that's what we're proposing on street. Garages, we have kind of a similar concept for a min and a max. So currently we talk about monthly rates are the same across our garages except 3 exceptions. 9th Street, we have a contractual requirement with BNSF because they have we have a ground lease. They own the land underneath the garage. That is 20% less than the lowest. We had different tiered rates for some roofs and reserve stalls, but generally speaking, our monthly rate is $67.75 and our hourly rate is $1 an hour. And we're recommending basically that across all garages, the council would give us the guidance to have a minimum monthly rate of $75 per month. 9th Street would still be the 20% less of that lowest, and then be able to charge up to a maximum of $200 per month. And what staff would actively be doing is looking at that utilization. If we set the rate at 150 and we've got 90% utilization in the garage, could we go up to 175 and push some of that demand to a garage where there's not as high a demand? And, being able to do some truly demand pricing. If we don't have, if we have a lot of pressure in some of those higher use garages around that hourly rate, we find people are substituting, and we have other garages that have capacity. You think Park and Shop being next to the plaza, is not a high utilized garage, maybe it goes up, but being able to have some ranges on those rates as we actively monitor demand. So that's what we have for garages. Surface lots, we currently have different monthly rates at our surface lots. We have a lot at 5th and Jackson that's $45 a month. 900 Monroe's $30. The Water Tower lot and Madison lot, both very proximate to downtown, have a very low rate of $18 per month. Similarly, we're asking to kind of have a range of $20 to $60 as the maximum for that. And, you know, we've heard comments about wanting free parking for residents, owners, and employees downtown. So what we would propose is that we make 125 stalls available at 8th and Madison, which is just across the interstate, to be free to employees of businesses, residents with a lease downtown. Now granted, you know, there's a walking distance there, but it's within what we would call a normal walk shed. And that's a way that, you know, if people want free parking, we can provide it at some of these other locations. So that's our recommendation on surface lots. Parking enforcement, like I said, we maintain the current enforcement hours, which by ordinance is 8 to 6 p.m. Our PCOs, though, are not here after 5, so there's not really enforcement that's occurring after 5. The ordinance is 8 to 6. The first violation would be 10 times that hourly rate, so depending on if it was 50 cents up to $2, that first violation fine could rate. And then it doubles the first violation rate for each successive violation. And then it also doubles the violation rate for 15-day payment elapse period. And so we kind of show you down here across the bottom what those recommended rate changes would be to the meter violations. Then lastly, the other piece that we're putting in there is, you know, the last time that there was an actual rate increase to parking was in 2010. Our parking rates are set by ordinance. We'd like to ask the council to consider a routine schedule for rate increases. This was one of the recommendations out of the parking plan through our consultant, but that every 4 years we'd look at 10% rate increases. We would also, as part of this, looking at our internal operation, basically too, as we look at that min-max, what we're thinking right now is, you know, there'd be 4 times a year or kind of a quarterly seasonal period at looking, hey, if we've set the rate here, do we need to adjust it? It's not something that we do on a daily basis. And then garage would be 2 times a year, looking at adjusting those rates within the ranges that you gave us. So with that, like I said, I wanted to present this to you and get some feedback. We definitely got a lot of questions that we need to come back and provide answers to you, but I would also like to take any other recommendations, i.e. should we look at a different way of paying it, the bid or something else out as we re-engage with our stakeholder groups. And then currently we had it to come back at December 3rd, but like I said, if there needs to be more time for that, I mean, we definitely wanted to keep the conversation moving and present on your mind, because we know you have a lot of things going on.
Councilman Jensen?
One quick question. With the advance in the new technology, do you anticipate a reduction in staff?
We possibly could have a reduction in staff, or it may be a shift of duties. As you mentioned, right? I mean, we're not anticipating adding any staff with these changes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
At this point in time, we move on to the public comment. The first person signed up to speak is Mr. Joseph Wakefield.
Good evening, council members. Apologize. have the information I wanted to talk to you on my phone. I turned it off. I didn't realize I was going to get up here so soon, but it's coming on. So, and it's on right now. So, all right. Well, I am here because about a month ago, where I live at, there was a lady that was driving around where I live at, and she stopped me to ask me some questions. And the reason why I'm here is because there's a person in town who is buying up all of our apartment complexes. And is it okay to mention names?
Mm-hmm.
Huh? Okay, well, I don't have no problem with it because his name is Lou McGinnis. And I would think that each and every one of you are aware of this person. Is anybody not aware of this? Because he owns, well, she showed me a list of a page that was almost, well, 2 pages full of the complexes he owns. Okay? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I feel like it's a shame on Topeka to allow a man that has a terrible track record as a landlord, and I'm here to represent those who live in those apartments, but they're scared to speak up because I'm 63 years old. Some of these people are older. They're living on incomes that are inadequate in the first place because you know there's very few jobs in Topeka, and some of these people that are retired now have very little income to live by. And if you are living in a place and you are scared to present your case because something needs to be fixed in your apartment complex. Now, this particular lady, she lives in one of those units off of 25th in Burlingame. There's about 4 apartment complexes over there, all right? She says that there is one maintenance man for 4 apartment complexes. So if he comes to that place, to that complex that particular day and does all the work that he's supposed to do, but yet still later on that day, you have something that breaks down. You have to wait a whole week to get it fixed. It's wintertime now, so if your air conditioning unit goes out, you have to wait a week or longer to get it fixed. And then if you address the situation to the proper authorities, you may get evicted or your rent may be raised up. So these people are scared. They don't know what to do. But when you call up, what is it, the Topeka Housing Authority, as far as I know, I've lived here all my life, and Topeka Housing Authority is one entity that a person who lives in an apartment complex should be able to call up and get some answers and the situation resolved. But from my understanding, their calls are being blowed off. They're not doing anything. And to me, that sounds like a recipe for anxiety and who knows what else, other health complications. And I'm sure a lot of them already have health complications, you know? And, you know, if nobody's going to do nothing about it, what do these people do? Y'all are not aware that this man owns almost about over 3/4 of our complexes in Topeka. So if you move, you're likely to move in another one of his places.
Mr. Wakefield, your time has expired. You had 4 minutes. Do you feel like you need an extension?
Yeah, I do.
How much time would you need?
Not much.
2 more minutes?
I got a question for Ms. Ortiz because this person told me.
Sir, let us, if you will allow us just a minute to go through the process to extend you for 2 minutes. And just so that you know, you're not allowed to ask questions to the council members directly.
Okay.
You could ask a question.
Okay.
And if a council member feels like they can answer back afterwards, they could do so. But this is your time to share with us your concerns.
My concerns, all right.
No worries.
All right,
So-
and go ahead.
So
To extend for 2 minutes.
we have a motion to extend for 2 minutes by Councilwoman Hiller. We have a second by Councilman Jensen. At this point in time, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes. Mr. Wakefield, you have 2 additional minutes.
All right, well, I was told that this particular person called up one of our council people, and her calls were not answered. And I got the phone number, and I called myself 2 times and found out that you can't even leave a message on the phone because the messages are full. So if you're council people and you represent districts of Topeka and people have concerns, how do they get in touch with you? How do they get their problems fixed? How does a man like this is allowed to even purchase these properties? Because any one of y'all can go to Google or the newspapers in Wichita and Oklahoma. He is not allowed to do business in Wichita. He's been ran out. Wichita, as far as what I've read, they have taken over those complexes that he owns in Wichita, and I believe he can no longer do business in Oklahoma City. So how is he doing business in Topeka, Kansas? All right? So I have other issues and concerns, but I think it's y'all's responsibility to get this handled, get this under control, because I know none of y'all would like to be in a situation where you are scared and intimidated by a person who treats you unfairly. And these people, like I said, they're living on incomes that are barely getting by, and yet if they go to see about their problem, they either get their rent raised up or they get evicted, okay? Now, I have some other issues, but you know what? I will call back and schedule an appointment to come back and talk to y'all. But that's my main concern right now, because there is a lot of people in this town that I hear that are afraid of this man. I'm not afraid of him, and the city of Topeka shouldn't be afraid of it, but it seems to me you are. So
Sir.
my time is up, that's fine, okay? But it's Lou McGinnis, okay? So
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. How you doing, Joey?
I'm doing fine.
Good. My machine does get full. It does get full. It's probably full now because you know
Yep,
what?
it is.
I've worked all day and I haven't been home to get my messages off of there. And I probably won't take them off until tomorrow. But I do look at my caller ID, and I write those numbers down, and I do return those calls. So I want you to know that. I want you to know that. Well, maybe I just haven't gotten back to that.
All right.
That's one thing. Another thing, you can call the council office at 368-3710.
Done it.
And you can leave a message with them to have us call you or whatever.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
So I just wanted to put that out there to you, okay?
All right.
So, and I'll try to see if your phone number's on there, and I'll give you a call. If not, if you want to give me a call, I'd love to talk to you about this, but there's only so much we can do. And I don't know the whole gist of it. I'm just hearing your side, but I would be happy to look into it.
Well, several years ago, I was in the same situation, and I was taken to court, and I had the facts, and I won without an attorney, okay? So these people may not have the knowledge that I have, so therefore, they need y'all to step up and do your job.
I would be happy to call that person, Joey. There's entities out
She
there.
was scared to give me her name, so I don't even know who she is.
Okay, well, how can I help them if I don't know their name?
Well, I'm telling you, there's
hold on,
apartments
hold
on 25th and Burlingame. Y'all are aware of that intersection, I know.
I will call you. I will
Okay?
call you. Thank you.
Please do. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for
I
your
appreciate
comments.
y'all. Thank you. Have a good day.
Mayor.
I will be back.
Yes, Councilwoman.
Just so everybody on the council knows, some years ago, the city did adopt an ordinance prohibiting retaliatory evictions, and it protects against retaliatory evictions, rent raises, and service decreases. The tenants have to be in good standing. So it is a resource that we have that it's intended to be preventive, so that once the property owners know it's there. And so that is one of the series of resources, and I can get with her too. There are hopefully resources that can be more successful for you.
I'd like to find out and be able to go to those areas and find these people myself and let them know.
That's wonderful.
Okay? Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Greg DeBacker.
May I pass out?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You could give it to the clerk? Yes. There you go.
Get you out of here. And I might need one. No, I have one. I need you to fix the heated cooling in here. It's cool in here. Cold. So you have your wrap on.
I have two.
I watched the news this morning and saw that the water rates were increasing. Really doesn't affect me, but I know I'm on Community Actions Board. 9% raise over a 4 or 5 year period, and I talked to Joe about that. That's not why I signed up originally tonight, but that's awful steep. Cost of living is not going up 9%. You know, it's what, 2-3%. In fact, inflation, the price of gas dropped here about 10 cents a gallon here last week. I'm worried about that. I would say not 9%. Let's tone that down a little bit. I worry, you know, average water bill is what, $100 a month? That's going to make $110, and then you compound it. It's going to go up. The water bill's maybe $40, and then the wastewater is usually makes it double. Number 2 on my agenda, city water department. What you have here, the city is building a pump station right on the edge of the city. If they're out of money, I heard earlier in the, you know, the city budget is kind of tight. I have this, they took some of my property by eminent domain. Originally, it was signed by a city employee. I did not receive that. I kind of feel like I have a breach of contract against the city. I haven't went against it, but kind of disappointed that he came to my office. We shook hands. We agreed on this amount. The city of Topeka is building a water department to serve people outside the city. The city limits is about half a mile from my house. You know, if the city doesn't have, has to raise rates, why are we spending money on a water pump station to serve people outside the city unless we're going to make money on it? Maybe we'll make money on it, then we don't have to increase our rates. But that pump station was abandoned by Soldier Township a long time ago. Vacant house ordinance, that's what I came for next week. I'll probably be back next week, but I'm concerned about that. What's a vacant house or a vacant building? I have 2 vacant buildings, no water, no electricity to them, but I use them for a warehouse across the road from our main building. I don't want to, I'm paying taxes on it. Some of the issues that the code enforcement are telling us is that they don't know how to find these people. You know, if the taxes are not paid for 3 years, they can get rid of them. And you as a group should force Shawnee County attorney to go ahead and sell these properties, get them back on the tax roll. I have bought properties at a tax sale before. I've bought them at a foreclosure. When you buy it at a foreclosure, you have to leave it. If the owner has enough equity in the property, they can redeem that house in a year's time. So I bought a property at a foreclosure. I could not do improvements. I couldn't put windows in, siding. I could have, then the owner could have came back and took the property back from me. So I let that house sit for a year. It was a gamble, and I still own the house to this day. I bought it about 15, 20 years ago. It was, being a landlord is not fun, let me tell you. Basically, you clean up after a lot of people. North Topeka drainage, and part of its water fee is going up. North Topeka is on what they call North Topeka Drainage District. We're paying 2 taxes then. We're paying for North Topeka, Soldier Creek. There are no storm sewers really in North Topeka, so water increase to pay for that, that's another issue. So I thank you for your time. Got 4 seconds. Let you guys get home.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. You're more valuable in my district out there fixing heaters.
Oh.
So if you call in next week, tell them you want to be put at the front of the agenda, at the top, okay? So you can get home. All right, great. Thank you.
Next person signed up to speak is Mr. Richard Laird. Richard Laird. Next person signed up to speak is Mr. Dave Jackson.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for allowing me to speak with you this evening, and thank you for your service, and congratulations, Neil, on your new election. In the mid-'90s, Natoma, North Topeka on the Move Association, was founded as a 501c3 organization for the revitalization of the North Topeka area. Our mission has been, and still is, to improve the housing and infrastructure, reestablish a viable business district, and enhance community pride and image. I served as president for the first 10 years. At that time, the Roebucks, Jim and Charlene, and I, and my cousin Jerry Glasgow, the Performance Tire owner at that time, began purchasing buildings in the Noto area as they became available to prevent them from further decay. And then with the initial help of Bill Fyander back here, we were able to move forward and meet almost all of our objectives in this past 25 years. In 2016, early 2016, Jerry and I did purchase at county tax sale the building at 911 North Kansas that had been the Ben Franklin building years and years ago, and had been abandoned for about 15 years at that time, and was in extreme, and still is in extreme disrepair. But immediately after we purchased the building, we did have an engineer's analysis to determine that the structure was solid enough to move forward and to get it rehabilitated. And because of that, then, we made the decision to try to move forward. But shortly thereafter, within several months, as soon as probably the ink dried on the deed, code enforcement issued a citation to us and about roofing material that was loose and some loose mortar that was falling down. So immediately we contracted with a masonry contractor and spent $25,000, nearly $25,000 to retuck the building and prevent it from being an unsafe structure. It seems to me, I mean, ironically, the building had sat there for 15 years vacant, but as soon as we bought it, we get the notice from the city. We've been meeting with the code enforcement people. I have about every 90 days to 120 days to provide updates on what we're doing. The gist of the matter is, and I've talked to City Manager Trout about it, is that they have issued a notice of demolition. At this time, I've been working with the State Historical Society, Tim Parris here in the city, to establish the whole district, the 800, 900 block, as a historic district. What that allows us to do specifically is to apply for and receive tax credits, both state and federal, to make the building economically feasible to completely rehab. Now, I've only got 5 seconds left, but I'd request a minute or 2 minutes more.
A 2-minute extension? Sir, would you like a 2-minute extension?
Please.
We have a motion to extend by Councilman Jensen, a second by Councilman Emerson. We proceed by voting.
Nine zero or what? Oh, there we go.
We
Okay.
have 9 voting yes.
May proceed.
Thank you. So in any event, with this notice of demolition, I can't afford to spend a lot more time at this moment to move forward with this historic designation without knowing, and I'll be forced to hire an attorney then to represent me and Jerry at this hearing that we'll contest it. So there's more time wasted, more expense for me and Jerry, and holds up the whole process. At best, even if I dot all, and I'm doing this historic thing by myself with the help of Kurt Sneathan and Brian Falk and Tim, it seems like a waste of effort, and I'm asking that, and I've asked Mr. Trout to help see if we can get a waiver of this particular hearing finding, administrative hearing finding, and so that I can move forward a lot faster and get this bill, this resolved. That's my request. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
There's none. Thank you. Oh, Deputy Mayor, sir. Deputy Mayor has a question for you.
Hey, how long does it usually take to get those historic credits?
The historic credits, well, the first thing is getting the historic designation. At best, it will take me, because the state's historically not fast, it's going to be 8 to 9, 10 months before we can get the designation. Once that's done, and you have your plan in place, the state it's pretty much an automatic thing, and they can issue tax credits based on their availability within 2 or 3 months beyond that.
And
we just
then
have to present a plan, and we can't, until we get the designation, can't present the plan or go for the tax credits.
So then what's your plan when all that's finished?
Oh, I didn't get time to mention it. I have an engineered plan by John Haas with HME. We'll construct a steel building within the structure and put a steel roof on the top of it to make it weather tight. One of our thoughts then would be to have a rock climbing facility within the building, because it'll be 3 open stories. Possibly, what do they call it, pickleball on the main floor. I guess, but that's the plan.
Okay.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Sandra.
Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
10 minutes.
Stop that.
Evening, governing body. Welcome, Neil. Been a while since you've been down here. But we both got the same MPA, so he's going to be good. Anyway, I want to hand these out. I handed some of these out earlier. Anybody that didn't get one, if you'd feel free. Just, I'm on the Washburn Tech East Advisory, and was just over there today. The building's looking spectacular. If you saw the open house earlier this year, you need to go back again. And it's open on the 14th, 4:30 to 6:30. And this is a building we didn't have to demo. So it is just great the way it looks, and you really ought to check it out. We've got a lot of people taking GED courses over there now, in addition to getting other training. And it's good to see that on the east side, and that's where they need it. And so I just wanted to welcome you to that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was what I read in the paper while I read it online. The proposed 43% rate increase that's proposed for discussion next week. Actually, it compounds out to about 45% over 5 years. The GDP of this community is growing at 2% a year since Matt came in, before it was declining. And nobody seemed to know that, but I did. Now, we're at about 1.5% inflation, and yet we're being asked to pay a 9% per year increase in water rates, and about that in stormwater. And so the people this is going to impact on are people with large parking lots, which includes churches, by the way, because of the stormwater. It's going to it's going to impact the rescue mission, these rate increases, businesses, restaurants, all the businesses downtown that we're trying to develop. I can't wait till they hear that their water rates are going to go up 9% when they're trying to build businesses down here and run breweries. Those take water. Reese's, Mars, Frito-Lay, all of these businesses use a lot of water. And I would never, I would tread very lightly into this if I was a city council member, which I'm not. But if I was in this governing body, I would be saying, what? 9%? Where's 2%? Where's 1%? Where's a flat? Where is it just flat? Last time we had 6% 3 years ago, per year. And we were promised we were going to get water lines replaced and the breaks would go down, and none of that's happened. We replaced some water lines, but we haven't had any kind of impact. We've got 240 miles of iron pipe that should have never been installed. That's according to engineers. We have breaks. I talked to one gentleman that's had 17 breaks in, I think he said 15 years at his house. Same section of pipe. Instead of replacing the whole block, they just patch it, and then his neighbor's pipes break, and then down around the corner they're breaking. He just described it. He says, I can't believe it. I can't keep my lawn because they're always digging it up. And he does live outside the city. He lives in the Sherwood district. So some of this water is going outside the city, as Mr. Debacker said. But 43%, where did you come up with that? And really don't answer it. I'd like one more minute. It's so late anyway.
We have a motion by Councilman Emerson, a second by
I
Councilman
just
Jensen.
want to wrap it up.
We'll add a minute to Mr. Ledbetter. You proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes.
Thank you. I think before we, you're going to have a discussion next week anyway, but I think something of this size and contemplation needs to be put in a committee. I think we need to study this thing. I think we need to take public comments on it. I think we need to hear from all the small business people in downtown and other parts of the city. We need to hear from the churches. We need to hear from the mission. We need to hear from the residents, most of all, how this is going to affect them and how are they going to pay it. I'm concerned about Highcrest. I'm not even their president anymore, but I'm concerned. There's a lot of people over there that that kind of an impact is probably going to potentially, they're not going to, after a couple more years, they won't be able to afford their water. And I just don't think this is good public policy. I think we need to be looking at productivity ideas, how to cut our cost, privatize more of our labor cost, do what it takes to drive our costs down, and so we have reasonable water rates. Thank you very much. And those are my comments only.
Okay, Joe, and I agree. I mean, I agree that we need to hear from people, but what I want to hear from people is a solution then.
Okay.
Because they're breaking, because we need to fix them, and there's no money to fix them.
Well,
so if they have a solution to how to repair all this with no money, with no, who's going to pay for it if we don't have an increase?
Okay, so that's a question to me, so I'm going to answer. Thank you. I've been looking at this problem for 6 months, and I know that we have a huge amount of breaks, especially in the distribution areas. And I figured it up, it's about $600,000 per mile to replace those lines. That's 8 blocks. We have, right now, $15 million in reserves in the water fund, 43%. So right there, starting tomorrow, we could get private contractors to start replacing, I would say, at least 15 miles of those lines. Gradually increase, but not at 9%. And also, was I not down here arguing and lobbying for, on my time, I didn't get paid for it, to get a second shift to the water department, and staff was great. They loved me being down here on their side. They thought that was pretty good. And we passed that. And that was a good step, but it's just a first step. I think that we need to, I've been asking the streets stay closed for long periods of time where we have a water break. I've been asking how many contractors we have available to fix those problems, because I was told by Mr. Samples, who's not here tonight, that we have contractors do that when it's in the street, which I believe. So are we getting more contractors to bid on those? Or is it just all tied up with one contractor? I could never get an answer. You've got to have competition to drive costs down. And that means you build capacity. You let other small contractors in the game and let them start replacing these water lines. They did it, I think it was 20 years ago, we did a whole lot of water lines where we had rusty water. The deal is that the rusty water wasn't breaking, but it was horrible water to drink. So we replaced, I think, I was told, 30 miles of that. And that problem pretty much got solved. And we didn't do it with massive water increases. And again, look at the economics of this. What's that going to do to a research? What's that going to do to a Mars? These are people that hire a lot of people here. You've got to think about your industrial users also. It's not just our residents.
And I think it's important that next week, that we hear, is it next week that we're going to hear all the information and take your comments into consideration?
Okay.
Then, thank you.
I'll try to be back.
Thank you. We can count on that, Mr. Ledbetter. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much.
The last person signed up to speak is Mr. Trey McPherson.
I didn't think I had signed up for public comment, but I guess I will get to say something. On the parking issue that we had earlier this evening, I would be very careful about that. A lot of, if we suddenly start charging people on Kansas Avenue, they're going to notice. There's going to be people automatically up in arms over that, especially, moving to a new technology. Do we really need to do that? And also for the whole parking issue itself, I would love to see more ways that we can encourage people to move to the garages, right? So we have these people who are already, whether or not they're getting a ticket or not, they're out there parking all day. Let's figure out how we can get them to move into the garages. But then on that note, make it easier to get a monthly pass. As far as I know right now, you have to personally walk down to the parking office and go through particular doors in order to get to that place, and then you have to go in each month and make that payment. If there's going to be a new system, that needs to be online. There's no reason why in the 21st century we don't have that stuff automated. I mean, if I can get, my favorite Netflix, automated, why can't the city government get some of this stuff automated? So, we can have recurring payments for our parking. So that's something to really consider, I think, as you guys move forward on that plan. I understand that it needs to move. I appreciated the comments that you made, Councilmember Jensen, about the having it being an enterprise fund. I understand not wanting to put that all into the general fund of the city and that, but we should never try to look at city services necessarily as a business. The government is nonprofit, it's paid for by tax dollars, so it's really important that the aim is not, as he said, revenue. If we can, let's meet those costs, but then if there is extra, that needs to go to something else that's more important than parking. So I'd really want the council to consider those points. Those are very important because citizens already pay taxes to the city, and so then when they go park downtown, then they're getting nickel and dimed downtown to park downtown to use the businesses downtown, which, then also pay taxes. So it's just important to consider. So thank you. Appreciate it. Didn't realize I I guess I didn't mark it.
Check both.
I did. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
It's okay. At this point in time, we move on to announcements. If the clerk would read.
November 19th agenda includes for presentations, we have a snow and ice removal plan and a utilities quarterly report. Consent agenda, we have the expenditure ordinance. Action items include ordinance for temporary notes and approximately $1.6 million of general obligation. We have set the public hearing date for to consider 2019 budget amendments. We have the ordinance considering the 2015 International Fire Code for Appendix C. We have a resolution asking consent to establish by Shawnee County a sewer district that will service the Sherwood Village subdivision. We have an ordinance on the small cell wireless facilities, the ordinance on a vacant and foreclosed property registration program, and then the charter ordinance regarding governing body member term limits. Non-action items includes discussion on the proposed utility rates.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's see, just a few things. We'll try and get with Mr. Wakefield also. You know, right now we have the ability by state law, we can't just go in and inspect their rental property. But if they request us to go in to inspect the rental property, we have the authority. So if there is someone that would be willing to come forward, we can go in and maybe make a change to this. So get him the number for neighborhood relations, and he can make that contact. But otherwise, the law is real strict with regards to what we can do when it comes to rental inspections on the interior. And I appreciate Councilwoman Hiller making the comments. We do have a good retaliatory law, and I think it's useful. It makes a difference, but still it's hard to get people to get over their fear, whether the law is there or not. Let's see. With Mr. Jackson, there's information that he's provided me, and also there's a lot of information that's been provided by staff, and I'll get you a summary of the facts related to steps that staff has been taking along the way related to that issue, so that you can have a complete story related to that particular piece of property. As was mentioned with regards to the rate increase, we'll obviously take these notes and we'll bring some of these issues that Mr. Ledbetter and others have brought forward, and we'll have that discussion with you next week. Look forward to explaining our reasoning behind what we need as far as a rate increase. So, otherwise, have a couple other quick announcements. And that Saturday, this Saturday, the 16th, Topeka Fire Department will have a group from Forge coming to our training facility for a firefighter 4-day training. And I think I mentioned this before, but Municipal Court did have a very successful Food for Fines drive in October, with 2,233 pounds of food collected and $4,438.50 in fines waived. It was an increase of 57 pounds of food and $164.50 more dollars waived, which helps those that can't necessarily afford to pay the fines. So that's all I have.
Few remarks. Just want to congratulate the Indian community for a beautiful Diwali celebration that happened this Sunday. Want to thank all of the individuals that put their hat in to be part of the city council. I think it was wonderful to see the great caliber of people that we had, and I congratulate all of you for being engaged. And that's it for me, Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. If next week wasn't so big, I'd hold these, but I think I better run. First, these are a short string of kudos for the most part. The Veterans Day Parade downtown on Saturday was awesome. They did a C-150 flyover. There was a parachutist that came down and brought the flag, nailed it right on the app. Two of them, one with two of them, and they both nailed their landings right there where they'd intended at basically 10th and Jackson. And everything from the school bands to the veterans from various ages to the float, the truck that was pulling the float with 21 black wrapped chairs representing the numbers of veterans per day that we lose for suicide, was just this incredible collection in that day. 22, you're right. Learned at that same time, though, encourage everybody to go downtown and at 7th and Kansas, look for Chief Cochran's dad's name on one of the banners. It's on the pole. Those are really a great collection. There were lots of comments after the election, which was last week, about turnout. Turnout was much better than was predicted. So a lot of people were pretty bullish about that, yet at the same time, you know, we still got some people hanging out there, sir. So we'll watch for Thursday, right, for the final settlement on that. And so, best of luck. There were comments about people not being able to get voters' information. We've had a lot of voter registration activity, but even seasoned voters were saying I couldn't find out information about the candidates. I posted something on Facebook that ended up getting a whole string of posts. Turns out that of those voters' guide, you know, the paper did do a voters' guide, but the word was out that they weren't going to do a voters' guide and nobody knew it was going to be on the front page and that it would be a sequence of days, so people will need to find that again. But Forge, the same group that did the flag, put out their first ever voters' guide. It came out late. Just shortly before the election. Voting had already started, but it is gorgeous. And I've checked with them. They are planning to continue with it in future years and to add the bells and whistles that would not only have the interviews from the candidates, but offer links to their Facebook pages and websites so that there would be a one-stop shop for local elections. So I find that very exciting, and I'm really proud of them and looking forward to all of us kind of stepping up with the technology to get that full issue and candidate information out. So that'll complement the voter registration activities. I wanted to give a shout out to animal control, in particular Jim Tersey. They don't always get a lot of kudos, more complaints about getting involved in neighbors, but one of my neighbors on my block passed away about a week and a half ago, and it took a while to discover that. And days after that happened, those of us that lived there noticed that there was a cat sitting in the window, and so it took getting hold of the police department and eventually making arrangements to get AC in to rescue 2 cats that had been there by that time for over a week. And Jim was such a trooper about it. He said one came to him, but the other was so scared, it literally climbed up the wall. And so it took him a while to get him out, but those are the things that we don't see, kind of our unsung heroes in service to the city, and I really appreciated that. Wanted to give the mayor a shout out. She did a welcome that was a speech as well as a welcome at the NAACP's Freedom Fund dinner, and it was awesome. So really addressed a lot of issues, set the stage for the first time NAACP has had one of those dinners in 4 years. It was really well attended, and Kane Davis was the keynoter later in the dinner, and it was a good start, but she just rocked it. So kudos to you. And on that line, just so everybody knows, on the 31st of October, people have, I answered a call from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And we had 2 representatives from the National Trust at the Brown v. Board site all afternoon. They were here because Congressman Clyburn from South Carolina had reached out to them about the possibility of putting together nationally a consortium of the 5 sites that were part of the Brown v. Board case. And so stay tuned for how that might develop, but the other sites are interested as well. Almost all of us don't have particularly well-developed heritage tourism about that story. And so if this continues, they will be able to provide some assistance in seeing what we can do about that. It's very exciting. So that's it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor. We have a grand opening for the Red Bud Park over in North Topeka, and that's Saturday. Gosh, I went, when was it, last Friday? And I went, oh.
I was there today.
Oh, I hope they're ready, but they're saying they'll be ready, and it starts at 10:30, and there'll be entertainment, and the ribbon cutting, and the Kansas Ballet there, and Topeka Big Band, and Quincy Elementary School, so if you can make it over there about 10:30. that would be great. And welcome, Mr. Dobler.
Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome back, Neil. We start at 6 and we're usually out of here before now. So we don't have those late nights anymore. Having said that, as you can see, we're still here, but welcome back. You know, Jeff, I'm just praying for you. Boy, you really know how to campaign out there, you know, and I even called one of our commissioners that was in District 7 and said, when are we gonna put an end to all this? I haven't heard anything back, but good luck to you. Thank you.
Councilman Emerson?
Thank you, Mayor. Just quickly, as Mr. Ledbetter already talked about, open house at Washburn Tech East, and actually Ms. Ortiz district and across the street from my district. This Thursday, November 14th, from 4:30 to 6:30, and just, even if you don't want to see it, it's free food, drink. So come out for that and get educated about what's available over there. It's a great facility. Thank you.
Councilman Padilla?
I'll keep it short. Just a quick welcome, Neil, to the council. I think it could be a great asset and look forward to working with you.
Councilman Jensen?
Just want to give a shout out to all the veterans. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you continue to do. I want to send a congratulations to Ms. Hannah Nager, who will be occupying this chair next. I'm very proud of the work she's done, and I'm very excited to turn the reins over to her and start the next project. Congratulations, Neil. Welcome to the team. You're going to be in for a hell of a ride, but it's a great one. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you much. Have a great week, everybody.
Councilman Dobler?
Very quick, thanks for the reception. Yeah, it's already been kind of a wild ride, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilman Cohen?
So it's been 7 days. No, it would just be good to have some closure, so it'd be Thursday morning. We'd like to know, I think both of us would like to know one way or the other where we stand. But I wanted to call out the city manager because the 29th Street between I-70 and Wanamaker has been milled and overlaid, so even took a special detour down there once I saw the cones were gone, and everybody was driving in the middle lane and not on the stripe, just like everybody has always done. So good job. We really appreciate. It was a very minor mill and overlay, just the area where your tires path is, but it really makes a big difference on how that road is drivable now. Thank you.
There are no public comments. There is hopefully no executive sessions. There's none here. So with that being said, this meeting is adjourned.